passion. And what is up, No Horsing family? Welcome back to another episode of the No Horsing Around podcast. As always, I am one of two dudes talking Colts. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Burton. And as always, we are powered by our sponsor, WagerWire. WagerWire is a revolutionary, one of a kind sports betting app that will change how you bet forever. You can get in and out of future bets at any point in time. You can trade on games all the way up to the moment the game starts. And then my personal favorite, you can get out of parlays before they bust. It's an amazing thing. Make sure you go check them out on Twitter at WagerWire. Go over to their website, wagerwire.com. It's going to ask you to drop in your email address, plug that in, get an alert when this amazing app comes. We're really excited about it. Okay, you guys. So on today's episode, I want to kind of talk about something that's gone around a lot. And, as we kind of muddle through the second interviews for the Colts, we know, we've had, I think it's 7 confirmed that are coming. You've had Jeff Saturday, Ajiro Evero, you had Raheem Morris, you had Wink Martindale, you had, you have Rich Bisaccia, I think today as of the recording. My guess would be tomorrow, Wednesday is Brian Callahan, and at some point there's Shane Steichen. And you kind of look at that over that list, and a great debate in Colts Nation is, do the Colts need to go offensive or defensive in regards to when they're looking for their future head coach? And I thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of talk about this because y'all know me. Me and Zach differ on this a little bit when it comes to who we think the Colts should hire. I'm a big Raheem Morris guy, and that's a defensive coach. And Zach is a big Shane Steichen or big Brian Callahan as well. Fans of those two guys. He's okay with Raheem, just like I'm okay with those guys, but we differ on where we sit. And I think that's very much where Colts Nation sits. So let's fast forward a couple of months. We're sitting in April, and the Colts select 4th. Let's say they don't trade up. Everyone knows they're going to take a quarterback. So everyone kind of looks over and goes, should they be taking an offensive coach who can groom that young quarterback? Because what is the purpose of getting a defensive coach? And a lot of the argument comes in that with a defensive coach, even if he nails the staff, which I think like Raheem Morris would, if that coach has a strong offensive coordinator that does well, he's going to leave. And then that coach has to replace him. And then there's the continuity issue with that young quarterback, right? Like that's the conversation a lot of times that we get. With an offensive head coach, you have that offensive head coach knows his system, and he's the one grooming the quarterback. And then the offensive coordinator is just doing what he wants him to do. Those are the arguments on both sides. So I kind of wanted to break down, and I'm going to go over, like I always like to go like the last 10 years, right? In the last 10 years, you hear a whole lot. Well, let's round that back a little bit. This year, we know that the final 4 teams, all 4 were offensive head coaches, right? You had Andy Reid, you had Zach Taylor, you had Nick Sirianni, and you had Kyle Shanahan. And you back it out a little bit further, and of the final 8 teams, I think only one was defensive, and that was Sean McDermott. And so it's very recency bias, right? Like we're like, oh man, look, these offensive coaches are the reason that these teams are getting there. You've got to go the offensive coach. So I tracked it back. Like I said, I wanted to track it back. I went back 10 years, all the way to 2013 to now. 38 offensive coaches were hired. Okay. That's going to give you a much higher hit rate compared to, I think I counted 16 defensive or special teams coaches being hired in that same period. Well, I mean, you litter them without, and you have a much better chance that offensive coach is going to hit and do well. And some of the names are multiple times. Adam Gase got hired twice in the last 10 years. Chip Kelly got hired twice in the last 10 years. Doug Marrone got hired twice in the last 10 years. And you start looking through, and I mean, and this is my argument against sometimes the hot young coordinator, right? The hot young offensive coordinator. When you look over the list of what I found, you have a lot of that. Dirk Cutter was the hot coordinator. Adam Gase was the hot coordinator. Anthony Lynn. And when I looked over these things, some of these were grades. And Anthony Lynn got a A+, and he was fired a few years later, right? You just look, and then for every Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, you have an Anthony Lynn and a Dirk Cutter, right? So you don't know when you're doing that just because just because you're hiring an offensive coordinator who's done really well doesn't mean he's going to do really well in that head coaching spot. Now, on the flip side with the defensive, that's true too. I mean, you start looking around Rex Ryan, Todd Bowles has been hired twice, John Fox. I mean, he went to a Super Bowl. Then you look over recently. I mean, the most recent one was Ron Rivera, and he's not done great. Vic Fangio fired, Brian Flores fired. So you start looking over these guys, and it just shows even more there's the hit or miss quality to it. That's why I think you look at just you've got to almost remove offense and defense when you're looking at it, and you've got to look at the coach itself. I've said from the beginning the reason why I side more with like a Raheem Morris is I don't want someone hyper focused on one side of the ball almost, because we saw what happened with Frank, right? He got hyper focused on the offensive side of the ball. And I think it lended itself to not understanding sometimes the game flow and missing crucial areas. They talked about in the NFC title game that you had Nick Sirianni who knew when to challenge because he doesn't call plays. And you had Kyle Shanahan who may have not known to challenge because he was so focused on the Devontae Smith catch, and you missed, and that was a game-changing play, right? So, I mean, there's that portion of it too. Another part of the argument that sometimes irks me that I wanted to put out too is that when a great defensive coach hires an offensive coordinator that does really well, he leaves, and then the defensive coach has to replace him. That's the same as with an offensive coach, right? That's the same as with an offensive coach. We saw it firsthand, an example. Frank Reich was never the same, and the offense was never the same when Nick Sirianni left. He couldn't replace him. He was unable to replace him, right? And then you look at he's an all-time great coach, but Bill Belichick has been consistently until this past year able to turn over and find that next coach, from Charlie Weiss to Bill O'Brien to Josh McDaniels, right? Like he's been able to kind of overturn those over and over and over. And sometimes you also have the offensive coaches like Andy Reid has been able to churn out those coordinators. Matt Nagy, Doug Peterson. He's been able to Eric Bieniemy eventually. We'll see. Maybe it's here. Who knows? But they've been able to do that. But on the same token, they are just as liable to not be able to replace that coordinator that they get, right? You look, I mean, I'm going to be honest. You look at the Rams. The Rams lost coordinators, several over the last several years, from Zach Taylor to I'm spacing on his name, the coach of the Minnesota Vikings. And they tried to replace him with the coordinator from Kentucky this year, and it wasn't the same. And that guy's probably headed back to Kentucky. And they were 5-11, and Sean McVay considered retirement because he wasn't able to replace that. It's exactly the same. Now I know that the system in their head is the same, but you could struggle just as much to hire the right coaches, whether you're offense or defense. I mean, for me, like when I'm looking at this subject, I just want the guy who can lead the team in general. And I know that's a very wide ranging, broad stroke statement, but I want someone who, you want someone who has connections to be able to fill those spots, not just in the initial staff, but maybe beyond that. I mean, and that can be a struggle for some of the young coaches. When you look around the league, Mike Kafka didn't get a second interview. He's 35. He's not been around a ton. Brian Callahan, that he's been around enough that I think he could put together a solid staff. But sometimes it's not the first staff, it's the second staff. It's who do you hire if you get poached? And like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if you're an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator coming into the head coach. And we've all heard coaches say the same thing. It's a whole different thing. You're not focused on one, you're focused on the entire team. So, I mean, it's something that I think there's been so much attention paid to they have to go offensive. They have to go offensive. I just think it's almost like the draft. You have to go best coach available. Who is the best coach available? Not offense, not defense. Who is the best person available for you? Y'all know how I feel on it. I want to hear what you guys think. Do you guys think I'm just kind of like crazy here, and that no matter what, that they have to go offensive coordinator for this hire? Or are you the same as me that It doesn't really matter as long as the person can coach, right? As long as the person can put together that staff and knows what to do and knows how to develop players. I want to hear from you guys. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all those great things. Let me hear from you. Let me see if you're in agreement with me or disagreement. And as always, you guys, I love you. I know Zach loves you. I'm out.